Hey guys, it's Josh, and welcome back to the Not So Bad Bachelor Pad, your favorite podcast for learning how to balance between being a functional adult and a raging dumpster fire. Let's be honest, some days we're all a bit of a dumpster fire. This week, we're welcoming Christina Braver into the Bachelor Pad. Christina, can you tell me how did you go from nerdy to dirty? Because I think you have a background in psychology.
I do. Yes. First, thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here. Yes, I have a background in clinical psychology. I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and I worked as a therapist for about 6 years, a handful of years. And then I moved into healthcare technology, working in that space. I'm great at the science. I'm not so great at the art of it. The compartmentalization required to not take the struggles of my patients home with me was more than I could really handle long term. So I made a career switch into healthcare technology when my husband and I moved out to the Pacific Northwest from the Midwest. And I worked in healthcare technology for a long time, just right at 20 years. And like so many people, when COVID happened, I got laid off, which was fine with me. I was ready to leave that space and do something different. And at the time we had teenage kids and really needed a parent at home. And my husband works in tech. And so he was gone a lot, busy working long days. And I said, well, going back to work full time, I wasn't working full time at the time. When I got laid off, the job I got laid off from was a part time job. I had managed to parlay a part time job in tech, which is almost unheard of. But I said, well, I don't want to go back to work full time. I can't sit at home and do nothing or I'll helicopter our kids into the ground. So I said, I want to do something. And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to read romance novels all day, if we're being honest. And he said, well, you're smart. You know how to write. You know things. Why don't you write one? And so I did. And that's how I found myself in the romance writing space. I've always been interested in the nerdy space of what makes people tick, what are the wounds that they've experienced in their lifetime and how does that impact their relationships, their life as adults, those kinds of things. And so I've always been interested in that human behavior component, the nerdy side, and then adding reading and writing. I mean, I've always read romance novels. And so adding in writing romance novels and bringing in the dirty side, well, that's how it all came together.
Now, that is a journey that I don't think anybody would ever see coming, you know? So,
Probably.
yeah. Yeah, so I have to ask because I would say there's the idea of things and then there's the reality. How was your idea of romance and what was steamy different than what you now find to be effectively attractive?
Well, that's an interesting question. If I understand what you're asking, romance. Obviously, I have my own relationship and my own romance. I'm married. My husband is German. I don't know if you're familiar with Germans, but they're as a people, they're sort
You're
of
so
stoic.
romantic.
He's a tech guy. He's an introvert. He's very, sort of, a by the book kind of way. So we certainly have our relationship and our ideas of romance. What I write is purely fiction, and it's based on what the genre is expecting as far as what the characters do. But also I read a ton of books by sex therapists, and I try to put a lot of real sex tips and relationship tips into my romantic scenes. So the genre may have a romantic scene, for example. So the guy has a big penis. Can I say dick on this show? I'm not sure.
You can say it all.
So in a lot of romance novels, the guy has a big dick and it's like magical, it fits, it feels great. She comes in an instant or after, just a little bit, which is not realistic. What studies show, what research tells us is that larger penises can be painful. The vagina, majority of the nerves, the pleasure nerves, and certainly the nerves in the vagina are in the lower 1/3 of the vagina. So a 9-inch penis is not going to do a whole lot more than a 6-inch penis lengthwise. It's just not going to do a lot more. I try to have my heroes, if they do have a big penis, like I do have a hero that does have a big dick, and it's not magical. Like he has to do prep work. They have to use lube. He has to check in with her. He does aftercare. He doesn't try to have sex with her 2 hours later because a lot of women report needing hours to days to recover. Absolutely. No matter what size your penis is, it's going to fit. A baby comes out of a vagina. No problem in making a penis fit. pleasure that it brings or the recovery time after, that is still something that has to be, that could be flexible, if you will. So that's sort of something that I think I try to bring to the romance world. So there's this idea of what's romantic and magical and make love on flower petals, and that's all fine and good, and that's wonderful. But the reality of that, I think we all know the reality of that is something different. And I try to maybe meet in the middle a little bit with my romance novels and provide a little bit of information. The romance, again, the big dick thing is sort of one of my little pet peeves that I think that's great. If you're reading a romance novel and he has a big dick and it's magical, that is awesome. But I think we all need to remember that that's not realistic, not in the sense that there's no one out there that has a 9-inch penis. It's that having sex with someone that has a 9-inch penis for a vulva owner is not going to just be magical. Some sex therapists have reported, partners of people with larger penises, their partner doesn't really do a lot. The culture kind of tells them all they have to do is have a big dick and they're 100% man, ready to please a woman. And that's not necessarily the case. There's still quite a bit of finesse. 60 to 70% of women can't orgasm from penetration alone. So it isn't just putting your big member inside her is going to make it all go great. So even though that might be represented in romance novels, and that's fine, romance novels are fantasy, and that is a fantasy. But I try to put a little bit more realism in there too, along with the fantasy.
That's really huge because if you think about it, not just in literary art that you do, but also in visual media, they always say like bigger is better. But realistically, like you were saying, you're taking these sample sizes and bigger is not better, but somehow we're still perpetuating the stereotype that it is. And then as the recipient, speaking for my gender here, when you don't come with the 9-incher, they're like, oh, and I was like, you said, I was like, physiologically speaking, you really don't want the 9, but when you don't get it, you're also disappointed. Mm-hmm. What's the solution here? Right. So I'm glad that you're able to find the happy medium. You're preparing people. You still can create fantasy, but a little healthy realism never hurt anybody as well.
Absolutely. I agree. And like I was talking to one sex therapist, and then I was actually listening to another podcast by a sex therapist. And I believe it was the woman on the podcast. She called it boyfriend dick, that someone with an average size penis, and some studies show, like 80 to 90% of men have roughly the same size, like within like 0.4 of an inch in length and girth. So, well, maybe not girth, but length for sure. But she called it boyfriend dick. Someone with a more average size penis is someone that you can have sex with when you get home from your date. And then maybe you have a snack and a couple hours later you can have sex again. And then maybe he sleeps over and in the morning you get up, you can have sex again. That's the kind of dick that doesn't hurt, that you can have multiple sessions with and go away for a romantic weekend. Someone with a really big dick is not going to be able to have that with most of their sexual partners. There's certainly, I'm sure, some women out there who love it and it's a great fit, just like there's someone for everyone, I think, I hope. I don't want to say that conclusively that there aren't women out there who really want like a really big dick. I'm sure that there are, and that's great. But to send the message that all women do is not correct. And I was talking with a young man earlier today, in fact, sort of talking about the idea that women, we tell ourselves that men want big boobs. There's all kinds of stuff of, Victoria's Secret will sell you all kinds of products to make your boobs look bigger, to attract that male attention, right? And then those of us that are smaller chested have always, maybe some of us have felt like we're not as sexy because we don't have, big boobs. There's things that we can do to enhance our boob size should we decide to do that. Male enhancement, size enhancement of your penis, there's not a lot really that can be done. And there's not a lot that's necessary, honestly. But if you're telling men that what they have is not good enough and there's nothing they can do about it, then that's just damaging. And that's men right now, I think younger men are angry, and there are lots of things, not just angry. That was an insult to them to say that they're angry. There are lots of things. Yeah. But there's a lot going on there. Men are only allowed to express anger culturally, typically. So that's why I said angry, but that's why it's not fair. Men are struggling right now. And so to pile on this idea that what makes you a man is having sex with a woman, and you're physically not able to please a woman, so why even try? No wonder some men are feeling like, well, what's the point? Like, I'm really pissed at the world right now. that message, I think, is getting out into the world in a way that's not healthy for our men. And my heart goes out to them. And I can't change the world, but what I can do is write a romance novel that validates people who are just average walking around in the world.
I mean, one book can make a difference. Look at Harry Potter. Okay, that started as one
That's
book,
true.
and it literally became a worldwide phenomenon. So
That's true.
one book really might be able to make a difference. But backing it up a little bit to what you were talking about, the first point, we do make a lot of generics just in life, but especially when it comes to sexuality or what we find attractive or sought after. You have size queens. You know, they're like, no, I really do want a big one. And I was like, you're right. I was like, but that is probably just a small portion of the women out there, you know. This is why men, we say this, we're simple, we're easy, we don't ask for much, but we always are really appreciative, because even though we always do, like, I say this, you can have too much boob is a thing, and this is a common thing. If you ask a sample of guys, I'm pretty sure most of them will say this: all we need is a handful. Okay, any more, and I was like, what am I really going to do with it? I only have a hand. You know.
Right. True. I mean, true. I think there's a movie that's like anything more than a handful and you're risking a sprained tongue. A sprained tongue. That's not me. I did not. That's a movie quote from the 80s or something.
But it's factual. But also, we have love. I was like, the itty bitty titty committee is a real thing, and we love those too. Okay, this is the realm which body shaming happens for guys. We can work with too much, and we can work with not enough. We can work with the Goldilocks amount as well. But I feel like it's not reciprocated for women. You know, they're like, if it's not big, I don't want it. And I was like, well, what about little dicks too? All right, all dicks should matter. Okay,
Right.
It's really body shaming if you think about it. Normally you see it like when women are wearing swimsuits, or how the dress fits. But I was like, it's the same for us. It's a part of our body where we really can't control it. Like you were saying, there's not really much you can do to enlarge your member. I was like, I think statistically at max, you can kind of glow things a half an inch, maybe an inch, depending on what type of methods you're doing. And we've talked about this with several different urologists throughout the seasons. And it's not like you go from 6 to 9, 6 to 12 inches. I was like, or even if you're under that, you may see some results, but you're not going to come out with a massive pecker.
Right. It's true. And it's not necessary.
Yeah.
To a certain extent, I kind of want to say to those women, again, there are women who want a big penis, just like there are women who want a smaller one, or there are women who want men with long hair and men with short hair. Like, it's a thing, right? It's just a body part. It's a body preference, right? But part of me wants to say to some of those women, do you really want a big penis because it's a big penis is what makes you feel good? Or has culture told you that big penis men are more virile, they're more manly, they're stronger, they're bigger, they're better? What is it that you want? Do you really want the big penis, or do you want the sort of macho vibe that comes with it? Or has just culture told you that big penises are better, so therefore that's what you want? Like, I think it's messy when any one woman says, I want a big dick. I think it's messy. I would just want to dive in a little bit more and say, okay, do you really? Or what's motivating that desire, and how bad do you really want it? Like, would you prefer a big dick in a man that doesn't take care of you and isn't nice to you and doesn't do aftercare? Would you want that? Is the big dick what's really important, or is it the person that's attached to? And you're right, it's body shaming. And in many cases, the shoe is on the other foot. And we vilify people who say, oh, a woman with small tits, I don't want her. I got no time for her. There's probably men who are like that. They prefer, either the Goldilocks size or bigger, just like long hair or short hair. Like, it's a preference, right? But I don't know that preference is as viral as we might perceive it to be. And it was funny, the young man that I was talking to, it was actually in my doctor's office, he was like, what do you do? And I was talking to him, and I was talking about this kind of situation with the boob size and penis size, and I said something about, most researchers and sex therapists will say, like, most men say they just like boobs. And he's like, yeah, any boobs, any size is fine. Like, he kind of said it under his breath in a way that was like so truthful, but he really didn't want to say it that loud. It was just it kind of tickled me, because that's what we hear in this sex therapy and in that space, is that, yeah, men just like boobs. Like, they just want to see them. They don't really care.
Well, I'm gonna even go further than that statement, because I've asked plenty of guests on the show. I don't know what the scientific phenomena is. I think I might do a study on it myself, because I don't think I've ever seen anybody upset while looking at boobs, men or women. I was like, in sexuality or preference really doesn't matter. It's just something about boobs that make people happy. It's true. I was like, listen, if you're listening right now, just say yes in the comments if you see boobs and you're just happy. You don't have to give any more, any less. But if you've made it this far, just leave a yes down there if boobs make you happy. But it's true.
That seems to be the truth. I'm a woman. I can't speak for men, but that seems to be what the literature is supporting.
How many of your girlfriends have you seen their boobs and you just like you guys can just talk about them non-sexually? It's just like, it's like, what did you have for lunch? I don't, you can just, how you can talk about what you had lunch, you can talk about your boobs, and it's all good.
It's just a body part.
It's just
a body part.
Yeah.
Yeah. And putting too much emphasis on size, no matter what your gender and no matter what your body part, can be often damaging one way or the other.
100%.
Certainly, I know women who have really large boobs that have lots of complications from them. We've all heard about those kinds of things. And they can either be over sexualized or fetishized, which doesn't feel good as a recipient of. It typically doesn't feel good to be fetishized. Or, there's a lot of physical complications, back pain, and those kinds of things that come with it. So, like, judging someone and looking at someone just because of their size in one place or another can be damaging if we take it too far. Just like anything, if we take it too far, it gets to be damaging. So that's, yeah.
I couldn't agree more. And like I said, it's going back to your writing that you've been able to find a balance between fantasy and real life sex facts and tips. So
exactly,
it kind of tells me that clinical psychology has made you better at writing the big O in a sense. But let's be a little more specific, because you have to have the right and left side of your brain going in order to be a great writer. Where exactly does some of your wow, English is not working right now.
All good. Safe space.
Where exactly does some of your inspiration for these more steamy scenes come from? Is it all fictitious? Is it a little bit of what you want to try? Or is this just a formula that has been working?
I would say it is 80% fictitious, like what the genre kind of is looking for. Because I write steamy, so that means they want open door, they want explicit, they want the words. I mean, I read steamy. That's what I want. I want open door. I want explicit. I want the words. I don't want, he opened my flower with his manhood. Like doesn't appeal to me. Women, it does. And I'm not yucking anybody's yum. Not just women, people of all gender. If it appeals to you, awesome. It just doesn't appeal to me. So because I don't like that, it would be difficult for me to write that. So I focus on what the genre and what the steam level is looking for, because that's what's interesting to me and that's what's exciting to me. And that's what I want to write. That's what I want to read. So that's what I want to write. The rest of it, I'd say, comes from the reading that I do with sex therapists and trying to understand what are some of the complications, what are some of the challenges. That goes back to my clinical psychology background. I've always been interested in what people's wounds are and how their emotional wounds and how those things impact them as adults. And sometimes it comes out in our sex life. Sometimes it doesn't. Some things, for example, say we grew up in a home where we didn't get a lot of attention, maybe neglectful parents or just parents who were super busy and weren't necessarily giving me all the attention that I wanted. As an adult, that has nothing to do with sex. As an adult, I may want a sexual partner who just can't get enough of me, is maybe, I don't want to say obsessed because that leads to bad things in real life, but someone who just gives me I want all of their attention. They shower me with attention. They shower me with affection. That's what I want. And so I've always been interested in some of those connections, our experiences, and then how those impact us. I think those intimate scenes are super important between a couple. I think there's a lot that happens when you are literally and figuratively naked with someone. All of our insecurities are exposed in one way or another. If we have a perfect body and our partner looks at our perfect body, that says something about us as people, potentially, that we have this perfect body that either speaks to an experience of where maybe we've been sexualized, or maybe we've been fetishized, or we put a lot of energy, time, and effort into being perfect. And what does that say about us? Like, some of those things just get exposed whether you want them to or not when you're standing naked in front of somebody. So that's sort of how my clinical psychology background comes in, is sort of looking at wounds, how those how they sort of manifest in us as people, and then how those show up in our intimate relationships. So I'd say, yeah, a lot of it is what the genre expects. Some of the things that I try to pepper in some of the information that I've learned through the research that I've done, the studying that I've done. Some of it, I mean, there's a little bit of it that's maybe like 1% experiential, or maybe a little bit of it is sort of fantasy. I am drawn to a certain kind of hero, and so I find that that's largely this kind of hero that I write. I'm drawn to the good guy. Alphas are nice. I like alphas. I read alphas occasionally. That I'm going to come in and tell you what you like and you're going to love it. And there's a certain amount, and that fantasy, that's a lovely fantasy because for a variety of reasons. And some of the psychology behind that is women culturally are not supposed to know our bodies. Men are just automatically supposed to know how to make us feel good. Women culturally are shamed a lot for being sexual, wanting sex, enjoying sex. If I'm not responsible for my own sexual pleasure, I don't have to feel guilty about my sexual pleasure. So if a man comes in and says, "Oh, baby, I know how to make you feel good and you're going to like it," and all of that responsibility leaves me and all that guilt leaves me, that could be a kind of a nice experience. In real life, a guy that comes in and tells me I'm going to like it, he knows what I like and I'm going to like it, is a predator, is
Right.
potentially a criminal going to sexually assault me. So that's not safe in real life. But in a romance novel, an alpha that comes in a romance novel is a perfectly safe environment for me to experience that kind of partner. So I read alphas. That's, super fun. No shade to alphas, but I don't write that alpha character. My heroes are, I call them good guys. They're flawed. Some of them are overprotective. Some of them, they make mistakes. They're just like anybody, but they're not super focused on control. They don't fit sort of a particular type of character. They're good guys. They're flawed. They're good guys. They care about their partner's pleasure. They're interested in putting effort into that. And those are the guys that I write. There's another in the romance world. There's an alpha, which is that I'm control. I'm going to give you what you want, baby, and you're going to love it. And then there's also the what's called a cinnamon roll hero, which I don't super love the cinnamon roll hero vernacular, but it's a thing. But it's sort of this sweet and gooey on the inside guy, and I think it sends a message that maybe they're not strong, or they're not tough, or they're not flawed, squishy, if you will. And my
Yeah.
guys are not that either. So they're just good guys.
It sounds like, and I can imagine it, that you only have so many pages to really create the world in which your characters live and to flesh them out so people know, okay, here's what type of book I'm getting into. So I could see not wanting too much of the other, because you're right. It's crazy how our fantasy, if given the context of reality, would be so problematic.
Correct.
But it's funny because this is how we idealize these concepts. So it's like, it's been idealized so that anybody reading this thinks this is what it should be. This is what we should go for. This is what is attractive and will stimulate me. But we can't actually apply this in real life. Now, it's different when if you're in a committed relationship and then you're playing this role in your relationship. But you're right. I was like, if you are too alpha, it does come off as predatory. But realistically, this is everything that you want. Because it's so funny. Somebody was talking to me today or maybe yesterday about it. And they were like, toxic masculinity. I was like, oh, I thought we were over this word. And it came out. Because in my opinion, there's nothing toxic or problematic about masculinity. We don't ever throw that about femininity. Like, oh, toxic femininity. I was like, no, we always praise and worship everybody's feminine side, their divine goddess that some people call it. But we demonize men for leaning into their masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to be a man's man, you want a man. Mm-hmm. So I was like, well, do you? Because back to what we were talking about, like the size, having a big Johnson, a big dick, I was like, do you really want it? Because everything else you say that comes out of your mouth kind of tells me you don't. I was like, you kind of sound like you want a cinnamon roll where you could just squish and squeeze, packaged in an alpha body. I don't know.
It's true. I mean, it's true. I mean, there's a little bit of that's the romance. That's a popular fantasy and romance. Absolutely. And we need to acknowledge that it is a fantasy. There's a couple of things to respond to there. I hope I don't lose track of both of them, but like 50 Shades of Grey. Everybody's read 50 Shades of Grey and has an opinion on it one way or the other. A lot of people talk about who don't know anything about romance novels, they kind of hold up 50 Shades of Grey as an example of a bad romance novel. Whether you like it or not, 50 Shades of Grey sold 163 million copies worldwide. It's a thing. But it isn't a thing because E.L. James, the author, stumbled upon this fascination with BDSM. 50 Shades of Grey leaned into 4 very popular fantasies. One being the bad boy redeemed. The idea that we take this alpha guy we call him alpha holes, it can be just kind of an asshole. And by her love, he's redeemed into a great husband and father, right? So that's a fantasy. A man who has either toxic, to use or for lack of a better word, toxic ideas towards women is likely not going to change in real life because of a woman. And women who say, oh, I'm going to take this bad boy and make him good by my love of him, that might happen, but it's statistically not likely to happen. That's why it's such a popular romance trope, because it's not really likely in real life. And if we take those books and say, oh, this is what we're looking for, and if men take those books and say, oh, this is what women want, they want the asshole, I'm going to start being an asshole because that's what women want, and not really. And then it's sort of like the chicken or the egg. Then, do we want asshole? I don't want an asshole, but then culture tells me I'm supposed to like this big masculine guy who then is mean to me because men think that's what they're supposed to be. And then, so you put up with it. It's like a self-fulfilling
Exactly.
prophecy that just goes crazy, right?
100%.
Yeah. So it gets confusing. Somebody has to sort of stand up and say, no, that's not really what it is. When we look at romance, we have to separate fantasy and reality. My books are fantasy in a lot of ways, and I do try to pepper in some real facts, hopefully to make people think about what they want. Other times that fantasy of for example, the guy that's really obsessed with me. Again, we've talked about that before. Like in real life, somebody who's obsessed with me is a stalker. But in a romance novel, when he's this guy that I'm attracted to and he just can't get enough of me and that makes me feel good about myself and he wants me so much, that is a fantasy that I can live out in a romance novel. And what I encourage people to do is when you find out that this is something that you like, how do you have that with your safe partner? Going back to the men who don't want to be seen as predators, don't want to be seen as super aggressive. There's men have reported that they would like to be more aggressive with their partner, but they don't want to be seen as a predator. So they hold themselves
That's a real
back.
thing. Yeah.
And so as a safe partner, being able for my partner to be, say my partner comes to me and says, I'd really like to be more aggressive with you. Let's talk about some boundaries. What are some things that I can do? How can I talk to you? Dirty talk is a thing, and dirty talk is just talk in a lot of ways. And so if we can talk about the things that turn us on, that we want our safe partner to say to us. My safe partner can say just about anything to me because I know he is not going to hurt me. So if I have something that I really like, there's something that I enjoy that's taboo, or I want him to say something to me, I know I can tell him, hey, I would like for you to say this to me. It would really turn me on. That's a safe space. I can do that. And knowing that about myself is great information that I might glean from reading a romance novel that I might not ever have an opportunity to find out because there's no other safe space I can explore that kind of behavior. But reading a book about it is a safe place. I can say, "Ooh, I really like this hero when he talks to her this way, or when he ties her up, or when he does whatever he does." And I find, I like that. I seem to like that when all the heroes do that, when all the heroes get a little bit aggressive, or maybe they hold her down or whatever. Like that's something I can say to my safe partner. I really want to be held down. And then I can experience that fantasy in a safe place.
I always find that romance novels are always geared towards women and female pleasure, which I love because, as we know, there's a huge gap between women actually finishing and men finishing. So I was like, anything that we can do to help bridge that, reading a book before adding some foreplay, layering all the other techniques that we've learned throughout the years in there, I'm all for it. And I guess it should be more of a how-to guide, but I wish there was something for men. I wish that, or both, because like you were talking about how you could read this character and you do this with your safe partner. I wish that men could read this and relive these fantasies, so to speak, as well with their partner or just any partner.
Mm-hmm.
But they need to be written in a way where they're not, I guess, as alpha, like as seen as predatory or as simplified as because that's the thing is you don't want a man who you can walk all over. contrary to popular belief. We just always show extremes of too aggressive or not aggressive enough. And I wish we could just find a way to make popular just in the middle. I was like, C's get degrees for a reason. Let's just be a little average here. It's like, hey,
Right.
you could have a daddy moment, so to speak, and be all in your, assertive masculinity. But also, there's nothing wrong with being an emotionally intelligent and available man. To be like, one of my favorite things is I don't ever yell at my partners, or I don't like to correct them. I was like, dude, babe, go do whatever you do. Like, if you get a little too spicy, like, we'll have a moment and we'll connect. But that should be it. Like, you shouldn't have to like, whoa, what are you doing to my girlfriend? I was like, no, like, you don't need to like be the dog and like just start barking. I was like, no, this calm energy is awful. In my opinion, is also alpha, because if you look at a lot of dog packs, the true pack leader, the alpha of that pack, he's not really going around barking. Sometimes his presence is enough. So I was like, I would love to find a way to like make that part of reality sexy. If a man were reading your book or any type of like smut or fantasy like this, what would be something that you would hope that they take away to make them a better partner, or that would really would please women?
Great question. First, I want to say congratulations to you on the alpha, talking about the alpha dog, because that's absolutely true. Alpha male is actually a misnomer. An alpha dog is not typically aggressive in the wolf pack. It is their presence in the space. They are a leader by action, and they rarely fight within the pack. The pack just defers to that alpha. They aren't aggressive. They aren't mean. Typically, they are just the leader. And so that's I've often thought about that, and I haven't really talked about it that much. So great job, you. I think so a man reading my book, I would really like for him to, a couple of things. I would like for him to take away this belief that, that number one, my heroes, I think, are attainable. Like, sometimes people say, oh, romance hero is just this, fantasy guy that no guy could ever be. And that's but some romance heroes are that way. It would be very difficult to be all those things, right? To be this soft guy who shows up and fights at the end of the day. But I think, like I do in my first book, the hero is the heroine suffers from severe endometriosis and ends up having to have a hysterectomy at 25. So that brings up some issues for her as a woman, for sure. She's a nurturer archetype, so she's not going to be able to have this kind of part of her life, which is the devastation. But endometriosis causes really painful sex, and 6 million women in America suffer from endometriosis, and we don't talk about it, and their partners don't always know about it, or don't know what to do with it, or how to handle it. And so she's had really painful sex. She has a hysterectomy and is recovered. She's kind of on this mission to find out what all the fuss is about. She meets a man, they're friends, they mountain bike together, and he's kind of an ex-player. He thinks he's got this sex thing all figured out, and it turns out that women are complicated, and what works for one doesn't always work for another. And so he has to show his sort of vulnerable side, to be like, oh, you don't like this? Okay, well, what do you like? And there's a part of him that's sort of like, wait, this is what I do. This is my thing. I'm good at this, but it's not working for her. Shit, what do I do now? So he sort of has that vulnerable side, but then also she is threatened by her ex-boyfriend is obviously kind of a jackass, and because that's how the trope works. But so he shows up and is being a jackass to her, and Finn is the hero, and he kind of stands in and defends her. He doesn't fight, but he sort of gets that big and is protective of her, right? But he doesn't fight. Again, he doesn't get physical. It's just more like, look, if what you say to her, you're saying to me, be sure that you know that you're saying it to me too. And then there might be consequences for saying it to me that are different than the consequences for saying it to her. So, like, I think I want guys to maybe see an attainable way to be someone who is not perfect, who doesn't have all the answers, who doesn't know everything and make all the right choices, because that's an unrealistic and obviously an unfair expectation for women to have on men. We women would not be very happy if men expected us to be perfect. And some women say men do expect us to be perfect, and we don't like it. So they're just proving my point when they say that. So I think I'd like for men who read my book to be able to see a character, a hero that they can be more like. For other romance novels, like men who are reading some of those alpha romance novels, I would like for them to say to their female, either their partner or to their friends, like, what do you like about this guy? What's sexy about this? Because is this sexy when he does this? Do you like that? And okay, you don't like that. Well, why? What's appealing? And then have that
Yeah.
conversation. Now, I say to a lot of couples, I say, I write dual POV. So I do a lot of reading about men and their experience. I'm not a man, so I want to try to understand men as much as possible so that I can write them as authentically as possible, since I do write in the male POV. But I encourage couples, like, read them together and then talk about them. Like, what you like this hero? What did he do what did you like about this scene? It's easier for me to say, oh, well, I really liked it when he held her down, or when he cut her off when she was talking so he could just kiss her because he couldn't wait any longer. Or I really like that he's so passionate about her that he can't control himself. And I like that he says those things, and then he can say, well, and then she can say back to him, well, what did you like about this hero? Did you find this heroine sexy in any way? And what did you find sexy about her? It's easier to talk about other characters and say, I like this, I don't like this, than for me to say to my partner, I like it when you do this, I don't like it when you do that. That can feel a little bit like an attack,
Right.
But if I say, oh, I really like it when he does this, I don't really like it when he does that, I'm giving my partner information about what I like without being any kind of aggressive or attacking of my partner. Is just a safer space. So I would like to see
Right.
men read romance novels and use them in that way, talk about them.
I do like that.
Yeah, I have said to some men, men say, oh, I don't know if they say this anymore. They haven't said it to me in a long time, but there's women don't come with a book. I'm like, yeah, there's about 1 billion books out there. They're called romance novels. Read one and start asking questions. And it could be like a treasure trove of information.
I mean, that could really be a really nice date night, or even if you don't read it, like you have like the audio book, or maybe a mixture of both. And
Right.
I was thinking about this because I was here all like women love book club. I worked with a group of women who had like smutty Saturdays, and like they would just meet on Saturdays at the end of the week, and then they would read their smut together. And I was like, how come I don't get an invite to this? Because that's the reason I started the show, is to give women a glimpse into the male perspective, the male gaze. But I feel like sometimes they're so secretive, like they don't want us to know like their secrets. And I was like, dude, it just makes us better partners if we can understand you. So why is that not part of the conversation? And I like that idea of like, what do you find attractive about this? Was there something even attractive about this at all to you? I was like, do you ever go through that in your writing process at all? Or is it just how you like see readers respond? Like you said, you do write from the male gaze. So I think that would be, if a guy read part of it and was like, I would never ever do this and or say this. I was like, no, not at all. Or it's like, oh no, this, like, you got it. You captured us like really good. Like you did that.
I mean, I would love for them to say the latter for sure. I did have an experience. I was writing the first book. I think it was the first book with Finn and Emily, the woman who has endometriosis. My husband reads my books. Not, he hasn't read all of them, but he's read some of them. Again, he's a busy tech guy. There was a scene in that first book where I think he goes down on her and she orgasms and it's great and she wants to return the favor and he's like, no, I just want to focus on you. And my husband said, no man ever turns down a blowjob. That is unrealistic. They're just not going to.
That's
Good
true.
to. I mean, I took that scene out. I mean, so I do want that feedback to. I mean, some of that is easy. Okay, well, that makes sense. I'll take that out. But I do think that there's a lot of cultural expectations and layers on top of how we show up in our gender in this world and in this space, right? And men are not supposed to read romance. They're not supposed to like it. That's romance is written predominantly by women for women. And so why would a man want to read that? And I think we have to break through some of those barriers. There's a book that I love called The Bromance Book Club. It's a series, great book, Bromance Book Club. It's fiction. It's about these athletes in Nashville. Which is sort of funny to me because I'm from Nashville, and this seems so unrealistic that men in Nashville would do this. But okay,
That's where I live at. No, that's crazy.
oh hey, so they're professional athletes. They get together. They have this secret book club, and they read romance novels, and they call them the Manual. And so, like, whenever one of the guys has a problem with his girlfriend or his wife, they convene the book club and they're like, well, and they talk about their problem with their partner. And they're like, well, let's check the manual. And so they go and they read, like, go back and look at and they're reading Regency romance, which is a little bit funny. And there's, a scene where one of the characters has a problem and they check the manual and they give him advice based on the manual and he refuses to do it. No, that's bad advice. I'm not going to do it. He goes and he does what he wants to do. And of course it backfires. He comes back to the group and they're like, well, you didn't do what the manual said you were supposed to do, which is it's funny. It's a, tongue in cheek, but it's a little bit true. Like there's information, there's certainly place to ask questions, a resource to ask questions from. Instead of looking at 50 Shades of Grey and saying every woman wants to be tied up and told what to do, that might not be the truth. A woman who really liked 50 Shades of Grey, my kids were little, like elementary school when I read 50 Shades of Grey. I said to my husband, that's a time when as a mom, am I doing this right? Am I feeding my kids enough organic? Am I feeding them too much organic? Am I taking them to the right museums? Am I taking them to the wrong museums? Like every question and decision I was questioning every decision. I was pulled at all different directions and stressed and trying to work and trying to be a mom and trying to be a good wife, whatever that is, and try to stay thin. And my hair was supposed to be pretty and I'm supposed to wear makeup, but I hate wearing makeup. Like the whole thing. I was just overwhelmed with life, right? And I was reading 50 Shades of Grey and I said to my husband, a guy comes in and he takes away all that noise and he just handles everything for the weekend. I don't have to make any decisions. So there's no chance I would make the wrong one. Everything's going to be fine in this 48 hours that I'm away from my life. I would probably do some pretty kinky shit for that guy. It's just at the moment I was like, please take me away from all this, right? And so that could be what's going on with your partner who's reading about BDSM. I mean, maybe they have maybe they have a penchant for that, or they're curious, they want to know more, but not always. It might just be that they're feeling overwhelmed in their life and they want the idea of just escaping from somebody to ride in on a horse and take them away from all this. That's something that I think is really common and also misunderstood. Just because every now and then I fantasize about my partner coming in and taking away all my problems and making my life magical and rainbows doesn't mean that I don't want to be responsible for my vote or my body or my career, or that I don't want to make choices. I don't want to own a home or have a job. That's not what those mean. It just means like every now and then I would just like to not have to for that moment.
It's like a cheat meal in these things. It's like you don't want it every day, but every once in a while, you don't mind splurging on it.
Exactly. It's a cheat meal. It is a dessert. It's decadent. It's creme brulee. It's just not good for me. And I don't want a steady diet of it. But occasionally, gosh, it's really nice.
Well, you write scenes that are steamy for a living, but we were just talking about this. You do now have teenagers, or I guess former teenagers. Do your teenagers know what's really going on in your office? Have they ever picked up one of mom's books? And if so, what was that like?
So I have a 22-year-old son and I have a 17-year-old daughter. And yes, they know what I write. We have tried to have a very what I call a sex positive home because of all the information that I have about literally the ignorance that's out there in the world, that people are growing up with a lack of information about sex. A quarter of the states in this nation don't require sex education to be fact-based. So what are we sending our kids out in the world to do and experience? Studies show that the only thing that the lack of sex education prevents is the lack of healthy sex and the lack of pleasurable sex. It does not prevent sex. The lack of sex education does not prevent sex. So we have always tried to be very open about certainly not our personal lives. That's private in the same way that their personal sex lives is private. I'm here for questions, what they want to come and talk to me about, but we provided them information. Here's the expectations. We waited for them to come to a reasonable age before we talked in too much detail about it. We provide them with resources, books. There's a website called OMG Yes, which is out of the University of Indiana, the Kinsey Institute. Great.
Their work. I love their work.
It's great. It's great. Like if you have a son coming of age, or if you are someone out there who wants to please a vulva sexually for any reason, check out this website. It is super quality. So we try to provide those resources to both genders so that they can be informed about their bodies and their sexuality, because it's an important part of our lives. So we've sort of been open about it. When they were younger, I used to do this thing called drive-bys where I would be like, sex is not just one body part going into another. It's not like sticking your finger in someone's ear. It's different, and then I just keep going. Like, they wouldn't have to respond. They wouldn't have to engage. It was just sort of, let me just drop off some information as I fly by. We set up expectations about safe sex and consent and safe space. And beyond that, once they reached a certain age, we were sort of like, this is your life. This is your decision. We're here for questions, but this is our expectation that if these things are met, then you're at liberty to make the decision about how sexually active you want to be. So we've tried to create that space in the home. So then, it's not that much of a shock that I'm writing these steamy scenes. Neither of them have ever read my books, nor do they ever want to, which I completely understand. They do not want to know that some of these thoughts have gone through their mother's mind. Like, that's a little weird, right? Some of their friends some of my daughter's friends have expressed interest in reading my books, and some have read parts of them. There was an incident last year where we go on vacation to this island here in the Pacific Northwest. The northern coast of Washington has a string of islands called the San Juans, and they're gorgeous, lovely, and they're actually the setting for my book series. They're wonderful. And we vacation up there in the summer, and I had written a book that was set at the resort set at a resort that was based on the one that we go to. And I say resort, it's very rustic. It's a fishing resort. So like cabins, super rustic. Don't think, Four Seasons Hotel. That's not the kind of resort we're talking about. Quite the opposite, actually. But I had written a story, and I'd given a copy of the book to the owners of the resort saying, hey, this is based on your place. I thought you might like to have one. And thank you. So they put it in their library, and the kids last year stumbled upon it. And I stumbled into our cabin, and there's about 10, 16, 17, 18-year-old kids sitting around while one person is reading the steamy scenes out loud. So I was like, okay, gonna sex positive parent moment here. So I need to just stand up straight, And I was like, are there any questions? And I said, one of the things that romance novels are trying to do is to normalize some things that might be intimidating or taboo. We want to open up dialogue about that. I said, for example, cunnilingus. Who here is intimidated by cunnilingus? And one boy who's about 16, his hand just immediately shot up, and he's like, I am.
That was me. I can own up to me. That was me for the longest time.
Of course you are. Of course you are. And I recommend a book called She Comes First by Dr. Ian Kerner for anyone who wants to know about cunnilingus or is intimidated by it or has questions or anything. Even if you think you're the master at it, I encourage you to check out this book. It's great. But I did, of course, I said to this boy, I was like, that's great. So brave. I said, probably, I don't even know what I said, something pretty simplistic probably. And then I went outside and I told his father, like, hey, this happened. Maybe you should know this, kind of thing. But I was glad for that moment because that's just what I want romance novels to do. I want them to be an opportunity to raise questions. I want them, boys are turning to porn. They're turning to porn. In the absence of quality information, they're turning to porn. And there was a study in the UK, and I was listening to the researchers. I saw an interview with the researchers, and they were talking about how there was one boy who said, asked a question. There was a question time, and he said, "Yeah, I came on my girlfriend's face, and she didn't like it. So I was wondering if I did it wrong." And it's like, this is a boy that's just. And I'm sure his girlfriend was like, I didn't like it, but maybe there's something wrong with me because I didn't like it. We don't know what all happened, right?
This is exactly what I was talking about of how there's no good medium for these kids to learn because they are kids who've just lived a little longer. Okay, because it was the same for us. It was the same for our parents and grandparents. I was like, nobody teaches sex, and like you were saying, only 25% of states require it to be fact based. I was like, so there's another aspect besides just facts of sex, and that's what we talk about is pleasure. Pleasure is something that's taught 0 places in the U.S. So it's just the scientific portion, which. You can't stop kids from having sex. It's going to happen forever and a day. So I was like, I feel like it's our job. And I love that you were such a sex positive parent because I've had a lot of parents on the show who they knock me because I haven't had kids myself. But because I'm sex positive, they're like, we could never talk to our kid about this or we would never. But really all it does is just gives them misinformation and leaves them underprepared and more likely to either hurt themselves or hurt others. And that was something that I had to come to terms with later in life is after I started learning and having this conversation is not prepared, not having the tools to communicate emotions or to read certain cues. As a guy, as a boy dad, as a boy mom, there are certain things you don't know to teach your son. And so if you are a girl dad or a girl mom, there are certain things that you can teach your daughter. And so you're just creating this huge gap of things that are expected and to keep both sets of people safe. Because if you look at college culture right now, I mean, rape culture is really big around college campuses and consent and stuff. But I was like, not when is this ever talked about?
Mm-hmm.
But we are ready to penalize people for it. And so I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to victim blame or anything, but I was like, if you don't know that something is a problem or like how to do something or that you shouldn't do something, and then you do it, and now everybody wants to demonize you for it, I feel really bad for you because you walked out and you were just thrown into this world, and you're like,
Mm-hmm.
what am I going to do? But they say you're an adult now, so I was like, there are consequences. And a lot of this, we have to start blaming parents and the school systems and society, because maybe we don't give them romance books, but maybe we start writing books for a younger audience to go over some of these concepts. That way you're not 18, 19, 20, or, let's say 16 to 20, ending up in a situation that you didn't want to be in and that you didn't want to put somebody in, because it's scary for both sides.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I often say, like, it's like, I may have said it earlier, it's like we're sending our children, I usually say this about men, we're sending men out in the world to pass a calculus test without ever having gone to class. That's what we expect. We send people out into the world to do this really important thing in their life, to experience this really important part of their life with no information or education about how to do it. Forbes in 2023 did a study. They did a survey of 1,500 Americans, and 70% of the people they surveyed said that their sex education in high school said nothing about consent. Nothing about consent. How do we expect vulva owners to feel safe? How do we expect penis owners to feel safe? To know what to do, what not to do. My daughter's heading off to college, and so we're having conversations about what don't like go to a party. You don't accept a drink from someone. If you drink a beer, make sure it's in the original container and you opened it. Keep the lid in your pocket so you know how many you've had. If you don't leave with somebody, yeah, I actually learned that put the tab in your pocket so you know how many you had from a youth pastor.
That's wild, but that's also a really great idea.
I know it's a great idea, mind blown. So trying to equip her with that information because I don't want her to go to a party and be afraid and feel like everybody there is going to try to take advantage of her or to victimize her. I don't want her to wear something that she doesn't feel comfortable in because she doesn't want to show her body. Because she's afraid that someone will victimize her because of her body. Like, I want her to go out into the world equipped to be who she is and to be safe in that space. I want to, do as much as I can. I don't want her to see men as predators. I don't want her to see them all as villains. Some of them are, but I want her to be prepared for that reality to keep herself safe. But I don't want to send her out in the world thinking that she's bound to be a victim at some point. I want her to be informed, and I want her to be able to say, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, this is how far I want to go, I'm not going to go any farther than this. I want her to own those things, feel confident and comfortable and informed to know those things. And the other thing you were talking about, like books and education and things to do. There are 14, 15, 16-year-old kids. They're not kids. Well, we'll call them kids. They're not kids like we think of kids. They're perfectly capable of reading a book that's written for an adult about sex. And if, you say to, a parent, give your son, She Comes First, and say, hey, this book was written for an adult who's sexually active. This is not me telling you that I think you should be sexually active. This is me telling you that when you decide to become sexually active, I want you to have information. I'm here if you have questions, read this book. I mean, it doesn't have to be anything more than that. And I like books and websites. I said when we gave my son's very, he's kind of private. Of course, he's as would any child be with their parents in this part of their private life. But I said to him, I'm like, here's a website. If you have to pay for it, any education, explicit content, if you are not paying for it, that should be a red flag for you. You should always pay for any explicit content. If you're not paying for it, that's a huge red flag. It's likely that people are being victimized. So, and don't assume that just because there's ads on that site that people aren't being victimized or that they're being paid. You need to pay for it. So here's this website, OMG, yes, you have to pay for it. Put it on dad's credit card. I will never know that you had this, that you saw this. Take it, don't take it. If you have any questions, you can ask me, you can ask dad. We never have to talk about this again. And we never have talked about it again. But he has that resource available to him and a way to access it safely and know that he can if he wants to. And, like I said, I don't know if he ever has. I hope that he has. I really hope that he has. And I think that's what I'd like to see parents do. It's not a great idea for a parent to sit down and say, well, this is what your dad and I do. Yeah, they don't want to know that. And I don't want to share that. No, that's going nowhere. There are ways to talk about these things. There are resources out there to do it safely. And I know that religion plays a part. There's religion wants to send the message that you should wait for marriage until to have sex. And that is fine for some. And I think, if you buy into that religious idea, if you believe that that's part of who you are, then I think you should share that with your kids. And you should share how intensely you feel about it and why. Our kids are different humans than us, and they're going to do what they're going to do, and they need to be informed and prepared. And at some point, we cannot control their lives for them. And this is a part of their life that is theirs, that is not ours to control.
Mm-hmm.
Parents who try to control that aspect of their child's life are teetering on a line that's dangerous in a variety of ways. Sometimes that line can be crossed into sexually abusive, depending on how much information you demand from your child on what their private life is like. So that's a slippery slope. So I encourage people to stay away from that line. Talking about your values, educating them and giving them information and helping them understand why you feel the way you feel about this adult topic. But then at the end of the day, we have to let them be the humans that they are, because when they're out in the world, that's what they're going to do and what they're going to be. And I would rather my child be prepared for that than not prepared. So that's how I feel as a parent. And that's what I like to encourage people to, that's how I like to encourage people to talk about sex, because it's complicated to have those conversations with your child. I mean, with your teenager, hopefully not your child, but like with your teenager. There was a study, I can't remember who did it, but said at 14, about 50% of teenagers have had some sort of sexual intercourse, some sort of sexual contact at 14. So that's why we decided that when each of our children turned 14, we sort of sat them down and said, okay, statistically, there's a chance that you're going to become sexually active in the next few years. Here's what we think about it. Here's how we feel about it. Here's some information. Go with God. Sort of, we're here. But at this point, we're recognizing that this is your business, not mine.
I love how fresh and realistic of a take that you two have done with your kids. And I want to see more parents on this wave, because we've noticed that the generations after us are a lot different. Things are coming faster. Mm-hmm. Access is a lot more places. And so if things are coming faster, but you're slower to equip them, I was like, where this is going to lead. This is going to you to be a 20, 30 something year old grandma. And you're like, what happened? I raised you better than this. And I was like, did you know? Because you didn't really prepare them. Yeah.
I mean, I understand, I grew up in the Southeastern United States. I've been a Christian my whole life. I'm still a Christian. I love my faith. I don't want to say faithful, because Lord, sinner shall lead them. But, I'm very into my faith. And I get this whole idea that some people are taught that the Bible says this, that, and the other about sex. That's debatable. All of those things are a theological debate, what the Bible says about sex. I did have someone once say to me that they didn't approve of sex outside of a biblical marriage. And I did not say this to them. I just politely excused myself from the conversation because it wasn't going to go anywhere good. But what I wanted to say to the person was, I don't have a biblical marriage. My husband and I have been married for 26 years. And I married him because I love him, not because I needed him to provide a roof over my head or because I couldn't take care of myself and I needed him to take care of myself. And he married me without the explicit expectation that I would bear children for him.
Yeah.
And that's a biblical marriage was based on survival for the woman and carrying on the lineage for the man. That's a biblical marriage. And I don't have that. So, and I'm having sex outside of a biblical marriage.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's just this idea that we define things some ways without really thinking about whether that definition is accurate. So I understand this idea that a lot of religions promote waiting to have sex until you're married. And there's reasons for that. And I don't follow that. I don't believe that. I don't agree with that. That's me personally and how I've communicated and lived my life. And I don't want to judge others, but others that do promote that idea. I encourage them to just be really cognizant of the world that their children are going to be living in, and they really need to equip their child, their young adult, for how to deal with that. And they need to check in with their young adult and find out. Well, I know that might, although their young adult might not really tell their parent the truth,
Honestly,
but they probably won't. But they need to sort of, this is how I feel. This is how I would really like for you to feel. But then, respect at the end of the day that they're going to make their choices. It's hard. That whole sex before marriage thing is really hard for a lot of, it's a hard line for a lot of people. And, in my generation, and purity culture was a thing. And we're finding in the research world, in the therapy world, that for some people, purity culture and waiting, true love waits and all of that was good for some people, but the vast majority of people, it was not good for. Women in particular struggle with the shame and struggle to orgasm and enjoy sex. And one of my books is called Your Turn, and the heroine in that, is a sexual shame culture survivor and looking for a sexual relationship. And she continues to be a Christian, but she is looking for a sexual relationship, and she is not necessarily requiring that she be married to him. That's not consistent with her values, and so in the way that she sees the world. And so she goes on and confronts some of those ideas that have been damaging to her. So I think we have to look at that reality too when we talk about sex, particularly with our young adults, that historically people of my generation, I'm Gen X and younger, sex was not something that was talked about. You're not supposed to do it before you get married, like all these things, but that's just not reality. And so we just need to be prepared to talk with our young adults about reality, and not the way that we want the world to be or that we think the world should be, but helping them to sort of confront the world the way that it is.
Well, I was like, Christina, we have a few minutes left, so we're going to do the quickiest of quickie questions. This is by far one of my favorite parts of the show, besides getting to learn about you and learn about how I should maybe start engaging in digesting romance novels. So typically I ask, what's your current relationship status? But it's been so interconnected into this episode. I think we know you're married by now. Okay.
Yeah. Married for a long time.
Yes. So I'm going to ask, do you typically write more in the morning or the evenings?
Gosh, that's a really great question. I don't really have a consistent writing time. It's more like when I can find the time.
Mm-hmm.
I do write a lot in the mornings, but then if I'm really working on something, I will find that I'll write into the evening, late at night. I think typically I like to write in the morning. I want to write in the morning. Yeah.
Do your writing sessions typically turn into passion sessions?
Not directly.
Okay.
Specifically, side story. I was at a party this weekend. My husband and I were at a party this weekend, and we're talking to somebody who was asking questions about what I do. And then I write some blog posts on Medium, and I had written one about fantasies, and that part of my job was to fantasize about sex and try to tap into what other people's fantasies are so that I can write them in my stories so that they're attractive to other people. And this one troll on Medium had responded, and he was like, "Oh, I feel so bad for your husband that you're sitting around thinking about sex with other men all day." And I responded to the person. I was like, "Oh, my husband's fine." And then I said something to my husband that afternoon at dinner, and he was like, "No, I'm fine." He just sort of guffawed. So we were telling this story at the party this weekend, and the person we were talking to said, "Yeah, how awful. You come home from work and your wife's been thinking about sex all day. That must be really a nightmare. What husband wouldn't want to?" That's so hard, so challenging. So no, there isn't sort of direct connection. But, if I sit around, if I'm writing steamy scenes, those days that I'm writing the steamy scenes, probably I'm a little more open to intimate time with my partner those evenings.
No, I love it. But I could also see writer's block is a thing. So I can imagine that, like having steamy writer's block and then coming and then your partner trying to be intimate with you, and you're like, no, you try to map it out. Like, hey, does this work? No, this wasn't good.
Yeah, that actually has never happened. I've never had writer's block with the steamy scenes.
Really?
They always come super easily. My editor, I almost never get any notes about my steamy scenes. It's always the plot and the connection and the character reveal and stuff like that. The steamy scenes those seem to just flow.
What's one trope that you've never thought about and probably will never write about?
I've thought about it, but I won't write a virgin. I think this culture is already too hyper-focused on virginity, going back to the religion and save yourself for marriage kind of concept. If you get the milk for free, why buy the cow? Which was an old saying from the Gen X world. And what does that tell boys and women about the value of women? The only reason to marry them is to be the first one to have sex with them, or the only reason to marry them is to have sex with them. So the only thing valuable about me is having sex with me. Like, what are we talking about here? So yeah, I won't ever write a virgin.
No, I mean, that's something that I've never really thought about it, but it's so true, especially like you said, in this hyper sexualized society that we're currently in. So I love that. What's the most random comment you've gotten from a reader or like a review, like one of your books?
Well, it wasn't really random. It was a little bit funny. One of my books is called Formula One Noel. It's a Christmas story. My son is a huge F1 fan. And during COVID, he sat behind me. My office was a different room. And he sat behind me and played video games and did his homework. I was kind of in a family room. And we'd kind of cordoned off a place for me to put my desk because my husband was actually in this space working from home. And he was watching F1 and doing all the F1 video games. And I know nothing about F1. I know a little bit about F1, but he knows everything, right? So we were just joking one day. And he was like, "You should write one about an F1 driver." And I said, "You're right, I should," and did, kind of on a lark. And I needed a Christmas story. Well, if you know anything about Formula One, it doesn't happen during Christmas. Formula One season ends in November, I think, and then starts up again like March. So a Christmas book is not going to have an actual Formula One race in it. But I did get that one. I released that book. There was a review. I got a 1-star review on Formula One Noel because I didn't know anything about Formula One and there wasn't even a Formula One race in it. And I was like, well, if you know anything about Formula One, you'll know that Formula One doesn't happen at Christmas time. And so that should have been your first clue that there wouldn't be a race. But I didn't, I'm not saying anything. So you do you, reviewer. But it was just a little bit, I thought, but nothing about my plot, nothing about my characters, nothing about my sex scenes, nothing about my romance. I got a 1-star review because I didn't know anything about Formula One Noel, which my son took great he was great offense. He was like, "We need to write her back." I'm like, "No, no, no, we're not writing anybody back."
Yeah.
But
So we're not
he
giving it
was
to the
like,
trolls.
"We're not doing it." That was years ago, and that's kind of always been that's my favorite review. Because again, nothing about my romance skill. It was about my F1 skill, which arguably I personally don't have a lot, but my son was very offended because he knows everything about Formula One.
No,
It was a little funny.
it really is funny how those little things kind of like trigger people. Like,
Mhm.
okay, what's a better plot twist? Second chance or surprise second round?
I think the second chance is an interesting trope. The second round, the surprise second round, I don't think that's all that much of a surprise. I think I write that a lot. A lot of my
Really?
sex scenes have either, well, because remember, I don't write really big dicks typically.
That's you,
So
you can't have it
I
both
write
ways, right?
boyfriend. I write boyfriend dick. So multiple rounds is just part of it. There's definitely lots of orgasms. The book that I'm releasing in July, she struggles with orgasm, so he actually has more orgasms than her, or he will orgasm before she does,
Yes.
which is something. So he orgasms, but it's not a failure on his part. It's like, oh, you're so sexy that I came, and now we're going to figure out how to make you feel good, which I think is a perfectly wonderful way to be intimate with someone. It's lovely if she comes first. Dr. Ian Kerner's book, it's all about her coming first, which is great. I mean, yay, I promote it. But it's not a rule. It doesn't always have to be that way. Especially I think that the concept of her coming first, it's predicated on the idea that men are selfish. And I just don't think that that's true. I think, if he comes first, then he's probably going to double down his efforts, to make sure that she comes too. That's the partner we want to have sex with, that we want to be intimate with. So I think multiple rounds is awesome.
I also have tried to start shying away from the tit for tat as far as sex or orgasm, especially.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I finished, so you have to finish, like one for one. I was like, it doesn't have to be one for one. It doesn't have to be linear.
Right.
As a guy, I was like, you're going to finish first 90% of the times. And it has nothing to do with, like you said, like failure or like a misfire. It just happens. It's a little easier for us.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that you should give up or that you won't do it again. Okay. I was like, 'cause some people are like, oh, he's done. Like, I guess this is over. I was like, no, there are other ways that we can get you to climax.
Right. I mean, depending on the man's age, like his refractory period could be as short as 15 minutes to where he could be back hard again. Yeah, I think that's the younger they are, the shorter the refractory period is. Also, back to what I said earlier, like 70%, 60 to 70% of women can't orgasm from penetration alone. So him being hard is not necessarily the stop. That's not the end all be all. A lot of women struggle with orgasm, and the idea that she must orgasm before he can is a lot of pressure that only makes that worse and can only lead to faking, which what guy wants to have sex with a woman who has to fake it to get him to stop, right? Like
it
that
hurts
doesn't
way
sound
worse.
like
It hurts way worse.
it's gotta hurt way worse, right? So, yeah, and there's toys. I once had someone say, I was talking with on another podcast about this, but I once had someone say, I don't want her to use toys because I, feel replaced or whatever. If you are feeling replaced by a toy, then you're not doing it right. You're not doing enough. Like if you can be replaced in the bedroom by a silicone penis, if all you bring to the show is your penis, then you're missing some key components, and maybe take a look at what you can bring to the show besides your penis. So yeah, I think focusing on orgasm is it isn't always great.
I think it's so funny. Well, it's not funny, but it's relevant to this episode, especially because one of our sponsors is Foria, which is a women-centered pleasure company. So they do a lot of oils to help relubricate people who have a little extra dryness or who might be doing multiple rounds, and it's to help balance your pH so that if we are doing cunnilingus, that it's not too off or anything like that. And I just love this episode and I love this topic because it just really bridges that, because you're right. Sometimes it's not a male issue. Sometimes it's not a female issue. Sometimes it's about the little connectors, and you kind of get that in your writing, especially. So just like kudos to that. Finish this line. A good steamy scene requires blank.
Talking.
What was it?
Talk.
I don't know why I thought
communication.
You said honking at first, and I was like, what?
Good, but I don't know it's required. I think that's a bonus.
Yeah.
I think required is talking. Yeah, communication, connection.
I could not agree more. Christina, my last question for you is, we have a book coming out in July. Where can we find that at? What is it called? What should we be excited of? What are you excited that people are going to get from the story?
So the book's called Hawaii for Two. It is a standalone. It is a vacation, fake dating, only one bed kind of family romance. She has a complicated relationship with her family. She goes on a trip. He goes along with her, they don't really know each other, and he volunteers to go. He's a swashbuckler archetype, so he's a risk taker. It's available for pre-order now on Amazon. It will also be available, I believe it's also available for pre-order on Kobo, the ebook, and then it'll be available in paperback on Amazon. And a lot of the things that we've talked about are, one of the reasons that I've talked about them is that they're so fresh in my mind because I've been writing this book and working on this book. And Levi is the hero, and Kate is the heroine, and Kate, again, she struggles with orgasm. Levi handles that very well. He is informed, and he talks about how he wasn't always informed, and he had to do some research. He had to figure some things out, in his history. So normalizing some of that behavior, I think it is a pure romance. It follows all the beats, and of course it has the guaranteed happily ever after. But I just dare you to read it and not fall in love with Levi. He's fantastic. He's just a really good guy. Yeah. And Kate Kate can't resist him either. So get excited. It's great. It's a great beach read. A lot of feedback that I get is that a lot of people read my books, kind of sit down and read it right through. They want to know what happens next. And it's a great beach read, summertime read. If you want to fall in love on a vacation to Hawaii, pick up my copy of Hawaii for Two.
Hey, thank Christina for coming on, sharing this, introducing you to a whole new universe of ethically responsible erotica or romance. Both?
Romance has been poo-pooed forever. It's trash. It's garbage. It's useless. No, it's really not. It's really not.
Guys, make sure you click the link down below to go ahead and pre-save your copy, or depending when you're listening to this, order your copy of Hawaii for Two. Let me know if you can relate to Levi or if Kate's your cup of tea. I was like, I know Christina's interested to see your takes as well. And then I will see all you amazing bachelors and bachelorettes, hell, even the partner people, next week for an all-new episode.